Hillcrest. How are we doing this morning? Welcome to church today. Welcome those of you that maybe have been, on summer or COVID hiatus, and we're glad to have you back and joining us. We've got a great service in store. Hopefully, some really good things as we get ready to kick off a new series next week. But you probably notice a few things different in here. And if you haven't been in church, the building for a while, you might think, wow, they really have been doing some different things around here. What you see back there kind of happened just this week. So Jason Reiser, his design, his effort, his work, did a great job. Would you give him a hand for all the hard work he did back there? That's really going to help with the sound in the room, which I hope you'll notice during the service, and we'll still be making some adjustments because, again, it's brand new last night. Amos was here late last night trying to dial and tune things in. We do have a need, though. I'm just going to throw this out there. We do have a need for some electrical work. It's pretty minor if you know what you're doing with electrical, and if you are able to install a plug or recess lighting or things like that, we have a couple things that we really need. So if you would be willing to do that, come talk to me afterwards, and I can let you know what those projects are, any of those that you might be willing to do. We're going to kick off with, first of all, a video to kind of get us going as it's kind of back to school. We want to thank our teachers. And then Trina and Kelsey are going to be starting us with a special song, a blessing song for our kids as well, that she'll be blessing in the second service today. But she'll give you a little bit more about that as well. Take a look at this video.
Our kiddos, preschool through even seniors, if they want to, are bringing their backpacks and sending them off with a beautiful blessing, as many churches and children's pastors do all over. If we have any kiddos and teachers, go ahead and stand for a second. And we want you to know, I see you. I literally know you all by name, so stand now or be named. You choose. Thank you. We want you to know that you are off on a journey this year that may seem even more different than you've ever endured. One of my favorite passages comes from Romans 12:2, that says we are to be in it, to be in the world and not of it. And it is a picture of a world and a globe. So I bought plenty of these, and if you're not going to be here at 10:30, please come see me and grab one out of my bin. It's something you can clip onto your backpack, binder, or whatever you want, but may this be a visual reminder that as followers and lovers of Jesus Christ, we go out into this world to be with them and not to be of them, and that is our prayer for you. You can sit for a second now. Thank you. Just in case you won't be here at 10:30. So the song we're going to sing is called The Blessing, and it comes straight from Scripture out of the Numbers, and it's one that I used to pray over my kids and kind of touch their foreheads too, and Carrie Job wrote a song to go with it, so just hear it as a blessing as we all go off into this little world in our next journey, starting tomorrow for many, and some have already begun. Hear this blessing upon you all.
Upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord turn his face toward you and give you peace.
stand and sing with us.
Upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord turn his face toward you and give you peace. Amen. 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 May his favor be upon you in 1,000 generations, and your family, and your children, and their children, and their children. May his favor be upon you in 1,000 generations, and your family, and your children, and their children, and their children. May his presence go before you and behind you and around you, all around you, in you. He is with you, he is with you, he is with you. In the evening, in your coming, and your going, in your weeping, in your weeping. He is for you, 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 he is for you. Amen. 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 May his favor be upon you in 1,000 generations, and your family, and your children, and their children, and their children. In your presence go before you and behind you and beside you, all around you. He's with you, he's with you, he's with you, he's with me. In the evening, in your coming, and your going, in your weeping, and rejoicing. He is for you, 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 he is for you. Amen. Amen. Amen.
Amen. Give them a hand. Thank you, thank you. Go ahead and have a seat. So glad that you're here today. All this week in the Facebook group, we've been playing emojified movies. And what's been even more fun for me is to see how bad Pastor Doug is at this game that we've been playing. So we're going to have 3 more times to make fun of him this morning here. Here's the first one. Which movie is this? Oh, Lady and the Tramp. Did you get that, Pastor? No? Can we go back to that one? See, it's a dog and spaghetti with the fork. That iconic scene, you know? No? All right, next one. Next one. What about this one? Space Jam. Heard it right away. Right away. One more. Ferris Bueller's. Well, man, that would be one. That'd be 1B, Cindy. 1B. Harry Potter is the one we're looking for there. So, good stuff. Say today after the 10:30 service, we've got a bunch of fun happening out in the parking lot. We've got Backyard Barbecue here selling lunch. Dakota Snow Cones selling snow cones. Those of you that registered to play beanbags will play beanbags as well. We got a water inflatable for kids big and small over here to the east or on Melanie. So lots of fun happening. Want to give you an update on our school that we're helping build over in Otoro. Showing you a couple of pictures here today. And the top left of the TV there, that is the new country director for Adams Thermal in Ethiopia. And you can see the work is coming along. Right now they are in the rainy season, so work has kind of slowed down a little bit there, but want to provide you with that update. And then next Sunday, we are starting a brand new series called I Choose. We agonize over little decisions like what are we supposed to wear or where are we going to eat, but are we glossing over some bigger decisions in life? Pastor Doug will be tackling those questions here all next month. Stand back on up, and Kelsey and the team will lead us in some singing.
I see you in the sunrise every morning. It's like a picture that you painted for me.
sin runs deep. Your grace is more. Where grace is found is where you are. And where you are, Lord, I am free. Holiness is Christ in me. Where you are, Lord, I am free. Holiness is Christ in me. Lord, I need you. Oh, I need you. Every hour I need you. My one defense, my righteousness. Oh God, how I need you. So teach my song to rise to you when temptation comes my way. And when I cannot stand, I'll fall on you. Jesus, you're my hope and stay. And when I cannot stand, I'll fall on you. Jesus, you're my hope and stay. Lord, I need you. Oh, I need you. Every hour I need you. My one defense, my righteousness. Oh God, how I need you. Lord, I need you. Oh, I need you. Every hour I need you. My one defense, my righteousness. Oh God, how I need you. My one defense, my righteousness. Oh God, how I need you.
Lord, we're so grateful to be back together today. Thank you for your goodness and your love for us. We pray for Pastor Doug and the words of this message, that you would speak to us through him. In your name we pray. Amen.
The changes brought by COVID-19 have been difficult. Our lives changed overnight as everything shut down. We were forced to deal with isolation in a way we'd never experienced. Suddenly, in the midst of the darkness, God showed up like he always does, turning fear into faith, quarantine into connecting, and downtime into precious time. Relationships were strengthened unexpectedly. And another thing changed. People all over the world, including our friends, neighbors, coworkers, and families, became more open than ever before to hearing the gospel of hope. The pandemic shook us, but it did not crush us. We shared good times and bad times virtually. We realized what is truly important in this world: each other. The church rose up to help those in need and to be the hands and feet of Jesus during this difficult time. We found out we are stronger together. As life returns to normal and things reopen, we'll never forget how important our relationships are and the value of spending time with loved ones in person. As we're able to gather again face to face, think of every person in your life, at every age and every stage. They're waiting on an invitation to church from you. Because in every way that God connects us, we are stronger together now more than ever.
Well, it is Back to Church Sunday, and again, welcome here this morning. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about conflict and disagreements and how we deal with these things. And with all the disagreements about the, what the current or what the appropriate response is to COVID-19, I think one thing we can all agree on is that we are worn out about hearing about all the options and ways that we should or should not be responding to the ever-changing guidelines that are given to us. As well as the attempts that certain people make to try and convince or, maybe convert others to their opinion or way of thinking about things. And there is a general sense of tension, a general sense of conflict amongst all kinds of people, both strangers and close friends and family members. It's one thing to try and stay healthy. But the real challenge, I think, with COVID is trying to stay in a way of living in peace with yourself and with others. Now, conflict, believe it or not, is a part of life. You can't avoid conflict. There's going to be conflict. And I want you to know that conflict is not a bad thing. In fact, conflict is a very good thing for us when it's done in a healthy way. When we have healthy conflict, it opens our eyes to new ideas. When someone else is sharing their perspective, if you're open to hearing that, it opens your eyes to new ideas, maybe things that you haven't thought about or ways of looking at a situation that you haven't looked at before. I think conflict is the key that leads us to solutions. That's how we come up with a solution, is when there's a problem between two situations, two people, two organizations, whatever it might be, finding a solution for that. Conflict also gives us added energy and helps us focus our attention on that solution-focused resolution. So important issues we end up having more focused attention for. I think it provides an opportunity to express oneself, not only to hear what someone else says, but to be able to communicate what you're thinking or what you're feeling about the situation. It fosters a closeness. Conflict can foster closeness and connection with the person you have conflict with because you're engaging in real and meaningful and helpful and healthy dialogue with one another. Conflict can help us grow. It can help us mature, and we gain wisdom through conflict. Now, the conflict that we normally talk about or that you normally think about is the negative aspects of conflict. Are there negative aspects of conflict? You're not sure? I guarantee there are. Those are the things we tend to focus on the most. Conflict in an unhealthy way creates anger. Conflict in an unhealthy way creates fear in people. Unhealthy conflict tends to demonize the other party or the other person or the other idea, and for multiple reasons. Sometimes it's just to minimize that perspective, they're demonized, or sometimes it's to protect your own position. You discount or demonize somebody else and their ideas. Unhealthy conflict creates polarization. So if there's a polarizing effect, I guarantee it's unhealthy conflict, and people dig in. And this is where this is the hill they're going to stand on. They're going to die on that hill. Unhealthy conflict creates fights and wars, and I mean real wars. And I think not only that, but it's wars between both a social and a physical elimination. That's kind of the idea. It's like you want to eliminate your opponent, either from a social perspective or even a physical perspective of elimination. You think of the atrocities that have happened in places where we've gone and served in South Sudan. Or you think of stories that we all know about of Nazi Germany and what was taking place with the Jewish population and the extermination of people as a result of these conflicts. Even in our own country, the Civil War between different ideas and coming together in war to physically eliminate the opposition. Unhealthy conflict results in all of these things. It ultimately results in damage and loss of even the closest relationships that we have. You see, conflict can be healthy and it can be unhealthy. And one is led by grace and the other is led by sin. And today, I want to help all of us see a path through the conflict as well as in our conflict that we have so that we leave it better than how we entered it. so that we leave those that we're in conflict with better than when we entered the conflict. Because it really can be this gift of grace that we can give one another. If you have always believed that conflict is negative, if you always believe that negative results are the byproduct of any kind of conflict you might have, to find the peace you so desperately need, we're trying to find peace and we have conflict in the midst of that, I want to challenge you this morning with the idea that all conflict is negative or has this negative byproduct. And I want to start with this phrase. Peace is not realized in victory. Okay, let that sink in for just a moment. You want peace? Peace will not be realized for you in victory over something else. You will never find peace if the goal to find peace is to destroy something in order to get it. Peace is never found in victory. There is always another option than just winning the war. There's another option than just being victorious in whatever the argument or disagreement or even idea might be. For though you think that by beating the other person or beating their opinion or viewpoint or beating them physically in some way that you're then going to have peace, I want you to know that there is no peace for those that lose. For those that lose the war, there is no peace for them, and they always come back to fight again. Do they not? Yes, they do. So today, I want to tell you a story. The story that I want to tell you today is a story that you have probably not heard in the Bible before. Some of you might have. Many of you will know the characters. Even seasoned Christians sometimes don't realize this story is in the Bible because this story, though it's main characters you know well and have heard of, it's not in an obscure location. This is in the New Testament and in the Gospels and Acts, main texts that you have read and studied many times. But the thing is that this story is not written in a single paragraph, or in one page, like from start to finish. It's peppered throughout the New Testament, and you kind of have to take those pieces and join them together to really understand the fullness of the story. And I think that's why a lot of people have not necessarily realized this story is in here, even though you've read it, and none of the parts that I'm talking about will necessarily be new to you, but maybe the putting together of these pieces as an event in someone's life might be helpful or might be a new idea for you. So I do believe that this is a really good story for where we're at today, because for me, this is a beautiful story of conflict, but it's also a great story of commitment and a great story of grace and of redemption. I think it's perfect for our current situation that we find ourselves in our culture today. That's why I titled this message, It is Either My Way or the Highway. So, the story that I want to tell you comes from one of the 12 disciples. His name is Mark. Anybody heard of Mark? You should have. Yep, he's even got one of the Gospels, right? You might not be aware that Mark is his surname. In other words, his last name. Anyone know his first name? Yeah, thank you. His name is John Mark. There was already a John, so he didn't get to use it. He got the last name Mark. But his real name would be John, and you'll see him referenced sometimes in the Bible as John Mark versus just Mark, but that's the same person. I think the story of Mark, and the reason why I want to tell it today, aside from it just being about conflict, is it is a very gritty story. It's a raw story, and it's an embarrassing story. I don't know, something about those stories I just like. And I can remember when this story was first shown to me, and I thought, my goodness, how did I miss this? This was in the Bible the whole time, and how did I miss this story of Mark and this raw and gritty and embarrassing story of his? Well, if this isn't ringing a bell for you yet, just hang on, because in the next few moments, I'm just going to wrap it all up for you so you've got it and you understand it. Now, I believe that Mark could be, this is just my opinion, Mark could be one of the greatest men in all of early Christianity, including all of the giants of the Scripture you know. Peter, Paul, I mean, you name it. I think Mark very well could be the giant of that group. I mean, if you think of just the things that he accomplished and what he ended up doing, he is one of only 4 who have their story of Jesus recorded as one of the Gospels, which that's got to be a pretty big deal. He walked with guys like Paul and with Peter. And the early historians called Mark a hero because of his amazing work that he did as he continued on in Egypt. He ended up being martyred for his faith. And I think it's good to be reminded of some of the great things about Mark when we go back to the early beginnings of Mark when he was anything but a hero. Okay, so we want to start really at the very beginning for Mark. Now, some of the things that I'm going to talk to you about today in reference, and I'll let you know when we come across them, are at worst speculation. But the speculation is done on deduction of facts to see what seems to make sense, as well as study and research from theologians and an agreed upon idea within biblical scholars on who is attributed to what. Because there is some ambiguity on who certain characters are or certain events and where they took place. But we look at not just biblical texts, but we look at even texts outside the Bible to kind of help us understand what these things were and what the Christians were believing and talking about at that time if there's some gaps. And again, it still has to be, at worst, speculation, but there are some things here today that I think fit really well together. I'll let you know what they are, but you can do further study on any of these things for yourself to try and come up with your understanding or your perspective on it as well. But we meet Mark for the very first time in the pages of Scripture in Mark chapter 14, so his own gospel, Mark 14, and it's verse 51 and 52. Let me read it for you. One young man following behind was clothed only in a long linen shirt, and when the mob tried to grab him, he slipped out of his shirt and ran away naked. Do you remember this verse? Some of your texts might say a linen cloth, whether it's a shirt or like a sheet. You might have more of a toga kind of idea with this. But this verse has always been there. I remember the first time someone showed this to me, they started with this verse, and they said, "What's happening here?" And I said, "Well, I've never read that verse before. Even though I've read Mark, I couldn't even tell you how many times. But I missed this verse of some guy who is in a linen cloth of some sort and then tries to get away and ends up being naked in the process, like streaking away from the scene, whatever's going on here. This here is a story or an event that Mark is recalling. It's the only gospel that tells of it. Scholars believe that Mark is talking about himself here, that this is him in the story. There's a lot of reference and a lot of reason why they think it is. So I encourage you, I would never get through this today if I broke down all of the research on why we believe certain people are certain people in this story here. But Mark is talking about himself, an event that took place with him. It's an embarrassing story, but it's part of his story, and it's an important piece for what ends up happening with Mark down the line here. So I think this certainly would be one of Mark's most embarrassing and humiliating events or moments of his life. But the reason why Mark has added this to a gospel account is that there is something honest that he wants to see, something raw in its unedited form here that Mark wants to reveal to us. So there's a few things that we know about Mark from the context that help us understand a little bit more about Mark. First of all, we know that his mother had a home in Jerusalem, and it was a large house. Now, to have a home in Jerusalem would have been meant that you had some wealth of some sort. So Mark is well-to-do, let's say, and he has his mother, which is the family home there in Jerusalem. And so he's got this large home, and many of the disciples met there on a regular basis. In fact, the early Christians met at Mark's mother's home. And there is a high probability that the Last Supper was held in the upper room of Mark's mother's home. That this is the place where the Last Supper took place. would have been very common for something like that to happen. It certainly would have happened in one of their homes because that's how the Passover meal was done. As the father, if there's a father at the house, the father would run that. But when it says that Mark's mother's house, that means there isn't Mark's father around. Otherwise, it would have been Mark's father's house. Would have listed off his father. Mark's mother's name was Mary, so it was Mary's house, and then it's referenced as that is Mark's mother. If it was his father, whatever his father's name would have been named, like probably, I don't know, a Greek name like Bubba. So it would have been like Bubba's home, Mark's father. Bubba isn't actually a Greek name, by the way. But so we've got the mother being listed, and since there's no father, it would have been probably the most common place there in Jerusalem to have this Passover meal. So it's very likely that the Last Supper was held at Mark's mother's house as well. So it would have been large, able to hold a lot of people, so they would have had some money. In fact, when Peter himself was released from King Herod's prison, if you remember back to that story, where did he go immediately following being released from prison? Acts 12:12. When he realized this, he went to the home of Mary, the mother of John Mark, where many were gathered for prayer. You see, Peter, when he leaves prison, he immediately goes to Mark's mother's house because that's where the Christians hung out. That's where they gathered. That's where they had church. Maybe the first church happening there in Mark's home. So this is kind of the scene that we have kind of setting up. Now, if the night of Jesus' betrayal was the night that they were at Mark's mother's home, I want to draw a little bit of a scene for you. Mark's the house. Oh, by the way, maybe this is common knowledge to you or not. People didn't like leave home and then go get their own house. When people in those days got older, they just stayed in the same house. And so you always reference a house by kind of the oldest person in the house. And as they would pass on, it would be referenced by the next person. But generations just lived together. Nobody ever moved away. There wasn't retirement homes or, long-term care facilities. Everybody was in the same home together at all times, all right? So in this situation, if Jesus is coming to do the Passover meal at Mark's house, and then he leaves, and where does Jesus go after the Passover meal, the Last Supper? Anyone remember? Yeah, he goes to the garden, right? To the Garden of Gethsemane to pray. He takes a couple disciples with him, right? And he goes out to pray. Now, the authorities, now that Judas has kind of said, I'm going to give up Jesus, they're sending factions out everywhere to try and find Jesus. You've got to think someone's knocking on Mark's mother's house door that night because Jesus was there doing the Passover, right? Where's Jesus? Well, he isn't here. Now, John Mark certainly knew where Jesus was at. He was at the garden. Could it be that as they left the house and other factions are going, in fact, they've already found Jesus in the garden, but they didn't have cell phones back then to tell each other. Could it be that Mark realizes this is the moment, and he grabs the sheet off his bed, this linen cloth, and goes sprinting to the garden, which is why he goes there wearing basically his underwear, because that's what the text is referring to here. He's basically showed up with no clothes on. So he shows up at the Garden of Gethsemane. Jesus is there. The Romans are already there. Jesus is already kissing the guy. Judas is already kissing Jesus. And all of a sudden, the guards are starting to find out who's who, and they recognize John Mark. You're one of the guys. They go over to grab him, and immediately Mark slips out of their grasp and heads off, running through the olive grove naked. Running away from Jesus, running away from the situation. And that's what Mark revealed to us in that verse 51 and 52 is this incredibly embarrassing situation where he runs off with nothing but his birthday suit on. You're going to also see in this story that Mark has a cousin. Anyone know Mark's cousin's name? His cousin's name is Barnabas. You've heard of Barnabas in the scriptures? Yeah, Barnabas was really an incredible man of God. In fact, Barnabas is loved so deeply by the disciples that they gave him a new name. They gave him the name Barnabas. His original name was Joseph. And they loved Barnabas so much, they said, you're not going to be Joseph anymore, you're going to be Barnabas. And Barnabas means son of encouragement. So he's an encourager. Man, I love to have those kinds of people in my life, don't you? Someone that's just an encourager. So much so they renamed him, the son of encouragement. And look what the Apostle Luke has to say about Barnabas. In Acts chapter 11, verse 24, it says, Barnabas was a good man, full of the Holy Spirit and strong in faith, and many people were brought to the Lord. I mean, Luke is saying this about Barnabas. I mean, stand-up guy. Paul is the one that tells us in the book of Colossians that he's related to Mark, that they are cousins to one another. And as the story starts out, Mark, probably in this event, early on, is probably in his late teens. It's about the age that we think that he was. And he is not old enough to do, like even in our culture, I mean, he couldn't rent a car. He couldn't even probably buy beer in Canada. Like, he's too young to be able to do a lot of things. And so as this young guy, cousin to Barnabas, who is this giant man of faith, very interesting. John Mark follows Barnabas around. Everywhere Barnabas is going and the things Barnabas is doing, the scriptures tell us that he was a great man of faith. He gave tons of money. He somehow had access to money, and he gave tons of money to the church in Jerusalem for the mission work that they were doing. He introduced the newly converted Paul. Remember on the road to Damascus? The early converted Paul, he introduced him to the Christians and to the disciples and vouched for him in that setting. He served Christ and he served the church. He was an emissary for them. He went around and proclaimed the good news of who Christ was and what the church was up to and what the church was about. And Mark is there all along, following along with Barnabas, growing in his faith. And in some ways, I think Barnabas was really a surrogate father for Mark. And finally, the big opportunity comes for Mark. The big opportunity where he doesn't just have to be Barnabas' cousin, but he gets invited to go on this incredible missionary journey with not only Barnabas, but with the titan Paul. Paul and Barnabas the Antioch church has said, it's time to spread our wings, folks. It's time to take the gospel into lands where it's never been. It's time to talk about Jesus in pagan parts of the world that have never heard about Jesus, and we're going to start churches there, one place after another after another. And Paul and Barnabas have a vision for this. They map it out. We're going to stop here, and we're going to stop here, and we're going to stop here. And each place, share about Jesus. People come to faith. They bring them together, and they start a church, and they move on to the next one and the next one. This missionary journey is a foundational piece for the Christian church, and Mark is being invited to go along. What a cool deal. This must have been cloud nine for Mark, and he's kind of earned his stripes a little bit by serving along with Barnabas. And so they do. They head out. First place that they head out to is they stop at the island of Cyprus. And everything is going just as planned at Cyprus. It seems like things are going great. They're sharing about Christ, and a brand new church starts there in Cyprus. And they get ready to board a boat because they're going to head on to the next location, but it takes a boat to get there because obviously they're on an island there at Cyprus. And what happens as they get ready to board the boat? Well, this happens. Acts chapter 13:13. Paul and his companions then left Paphos by the ship for Pamphylia, and landing at the port town of Perga, there John Mark left them and returned to Jerusalem. Dope! Now don't just skip over this. Oh, John Mark left them and went back to Jerusalem. This guy skips out on Barnabas and Paul and the missionary journey after the first stop. Why? Well, you can read ahead. You're not going to find out why. You're not going to know what happened here with Mark, but it is pretty obvious that young Mark couldn't handle the trip, couldn't handle the work, couldn't handle the sleeping conditions, couldn't handle, whatever it was that was going on, and decided, I don't want to do this anymore. I just want to go back to Jerusalem. Without any time the Bible gives us a situation and does not give the reason for it, you can pretty much guarantee it's not for a good reason. that Mark is skipping out on this. I mean, he's a kid. He misses his Xbox. He misses pizza rolls from home or mama's home cooking. You know, there's a new episode or a series on Netflix he wanted to catch, but there's no, Wi-Fi, or he left his phone charger at home. I don't know what Mark's problem is, but he is not wanting to finish and continue on the journey. So he skips out. What do Paul and Barnabas do? They continue on, and they rock it. They do an amazing work. Make their way all the way around, starting churches every place that they go. They finally make it back to Jerusalem, and they rest there for a while. And there's more ministry work that's happening right there in Jerusalem. And the time comes which Barnabas says to Paul, hey, Paul, we better take off again, and we need to go visit all these churches again and make sure they're doing okay. Make sure they're healthy, make sure that their teaching is good. I mean, we could only give them so much of the doctrine of who Jesus is, and we need to be sure that they are getting it, they're understanding it. And Paul agrees, and they're like, yep, we're going to take off. Let's go on another trip, and we're going to hit all these same sites again. We're going to hit a few more too, but we're going to visit all these churches again, see how those Christians are doing. And then Barnabas says, hey, I got another great idea. Let's take Mark again. That went over like a lead balloon. This is how you know that Mark left for not a good reason. Because Paul is livid. Now, Paul's kind of known for being a bit of a hothead, right? Paul says some harsh things. He's got a sharp tongue. Mark is Barnabas' cousin, and Paul doesn't give a rip. Barnabas loves Mark. Paul says, phooey. Not interested in this kid joining us on this. In fact, the biblical text says that the disagreement between Paul and Barnabas was so big that it calls it a sharp dispute. And trust me, folks, that is Bible speak for fight, argue, loud voices, a lot of conflict, and a lot of tension between these two men. Paul is ticked. Paul doesn't want Mark to come along. And Paul doesn't care that it means he has to carry his own luggage or has to make his own Starbucks runs. It ain't worth it to bring Mark along because Mark ditched them at the beginning of the journey and couldn't handle it. So what happened? Well, the Bible tells us that Barnabas and Paul went separate ways. These two men that were giants in the church that were doing incredible things for God, they split. A division of Mark split these two giants of the faith. They parted ways. And Barnabas took Mark and went back home to Crete. And what did Paul do? Paul said, I'm not stopping the work, and he picked Silas. And Paul and Silas headed out on the missionary journey. It was supposed to be Paul and Barnabas, but instead it was Paul and Silas. And to make matters worse, this whole issue comes before the entire church. Acts 15:40. It says, Paul chose Silas, and as he left, the believers entrusted him to the Lord's gracious care. Okay, can you read between the lines here? Because again, this is like Bible speak for they sided with Paul. They blessed Barnabas, not even working for the church right now, just headed home. Took Mark with him. Left town. But Paul picked Silas, has the church's blessing, go do this, because we agree, Mark was a joke. Mark was not going to cut it. Mark would only slow things down. Mark is not good for this. Mark is not called by the church to do this kind of work. Barnabas was wrong in suggesting and insisting on this. He left. Paul picked Silas, and the ministry continues. The devastation is so great that this great man of faith, Barnabas, is never mentioned again in the New Testament except by memory. The church divided over the issue. And the work that God had for Paul and Barnabas together will never be realized. And again, the reason is because Mark was too spoiled to pull his own weight and do the hard stuff that first trip. Could there be a bigger failure than Mark? His failure was long-reaching. His failure was impactful. But I'm concerned in the church today and for the last 2,000 years that we're not doing a lot better when it comes to arguing and disagreeing and dividing. I have been at the helm of this church in the midst of issues of division. And I've sat and watched the issue of division, both grand and small scale, hundreds of times impact people here at Hillcrest and in my life. Family disputes in which fathers and sons no longer speak, mothers and daughters no longer speak. It always ends the same way. Broken relationships, lost ministry opportunities, and burned out people. I believe that COVID-19 is here today as a ministry divider. It is not a virus. It's a virus on the church to divide us. I believe that Satan has used a virus, which should have, the virus alone should have been the thing that brought us together and giving us as the church, as the hands and feet of Jesus, should have given us a platform to serve our community with hope and with love. And some have. Don't get me wrong. Some have. But I've also seen many, many Christians fight and divide over how people or churches or communities should be responding to COVID-19. And when Christians fight over their opinions on things, their feelings on how something should be, I try to ask myself this question: what will I lose if I win? I learned to ask that question after the year 2005 because I won something in 2005 in the way of division, and I lost something tremendous. And I learned that I always have to ask the question, what do I lose if I win? I think we have to ask that of each other. I think we have to ask that of ourselves. What do we lose if we win? Maybe say it this way, if you're taking notes. With every win, there is an even more powerful loss. With every win in conflict in our lives, there is an even more powerful loss. And why do I say more powerful? Because the agony of defeat is real. The elation of a win is one thing, but the agony of defeat is deeper. For every great win, there is a more powerful loss that has taken place. And if I win something, what friend do I lose? If I win, what ally have I lost? If I win, how is the church going to fare? If I win, what will my witness lose? If I win, what will my love lose? There is no value to winning if the loss is of equal or greater value. There's no value to winning if the loss is of equal or greater value. We must count the cost. Count the cost of our words. Count the cost of our actions. And if you know me, I am no pushover. I'm not saying just be pushed over. I am no pushover. I can fight to the death, and everything around me can burn in my fight. I've got stick-with-it power. But what would I lose if I win? Did you know that winning is really just a nicer way of saying dominating? Am I wrong? Winning is just a nice way of saying dominating. I mean, I win a game, I dominate my opponent. Today, if you play beanbags with me, I'm going to win and dominate you. There, I said it. Or you might win and dominate me. Because whoever wins was more skilled, or had better equipment, or was better trained, or even had a little luck on their side. But the opponent you play against also wants to win. The winner did better, and the opponent, though they tried to win, lost and were dominated by the winner. You see, even if you win an argument, you have factually or intellectually dominated your opponent. And how do you think the one that was dominated feels? How do you think the person who lost the argument feels? Are they thankful for your position? Are they thankful for your wisdom and insight? How do they feel about you when your opinion dominated theirs? When you just had more facts and could out-talk them and they didn't know where to go from there? I can promise you they don't feel positive about you. And Mark recorded some words in the Bible that were said by Jesus. And as Mark wrote these down in his gospel, thinking of his past and what he did, these must have been really tough words for him to write. Mark 8:36. And Jesus said, "And what do you benefit if you gain the whole world but lose your own soul?" You win it all. And in the process, you lose even more. What value is there in winning if you're still going to lose something as a result? Are there things worth fighting over? You bet there are. There are plenty of good things to fight over. The foundation of our faith, that Jesus Christ is Lord, that he is the Son of God, that he died to save us, that he rose from the dead. Yep, we'll fight over those things. The Bible tells us that we need to feed the hungry and clothe the naked. We need to fight for the right and the ability to serve other people. We need to fight for the right to love others. We need to fight ourselves on our own stereotypes and our own conditions to love another person. We need to fight to be able to serve. We need to fight against division. But I tell you, if there's something in life that matters to you, and your fight for it hurts the church, I have two words to say. Stop it. If it matters to you, but it's going to hurt the church, stop. There is another way to go about this. There is a different way that we can do this. Count the cost. Because if you win, what are you going to lose? When it comes to something like COVID-19 that is just on all of our minds right now, can you accept the fact that your opinion, as informed as your opinion might be a wrong opinion? Is there any room for that your opinion might be wrong? But then again, what if you're right? What if you're 100% right on your opinion? And for the person here at Hillcrest that thinks differently than you, is there any room that they might be right? Because they might be right. But then again, they might be wrong also. And when you think of the issues, the biggest issues with COVID-19, which revolve around masks and social distancing, what value is there if in exerting your preference by shaming or condemning someone who thinks differently, what is the value to doing that? I would rather encourage you to fight to discover how you can love the person who thinks differently than you do. I think that there is real value to that way of doing things. How can I love someone that believes and thinks differently than me? Because I tell you, it will build love and it will build unity, which is what the church needs. So whatever happened to Mark? Well, it looks like Mark grew up a little bit. He matured a little bit. He became a much better man than he was in his earlier years. In fact, look what Paul wrote 15 years later after Mark's abandonment. He wrote it to the letter to the church in Colossians. Colossians chapter 4, verse 10. Paul writes this. He says that as he's in prison here, he wants to send greetings. But he says, I'm going to send greetings, but so does Mark, Barnabas' cousin. As you were instructed before, make Mark welcome if he comes your way. Paul, the one that so sharply disagreed he went a separate way, now has Mark as a trusted companion. Yep, Mark and Paul are together again in ministry. Reconciliation has happened. Restoration is the result of what's taken place here. But I believe it gets even better because Mark has been faithful. Mark has humbled himself. And as a result, he gets to work with Peter himself. And Peter writes this about Mark in his letter. 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 13, the end of that verse, he calls Mark my son Mark. Paul is reconciled. Peter, the first pastor of the church, calls Mark his son. I'm going to invite the worship team to come up as they get ready to close us in a song. The few final comments I have on this story. Because restoration now comes full circle for Mark. And I tell you, restoration is what happens each and every time when we allow love to win and not our conflict. Many years later, Paul finds himself in prison yet again. And this time, Paul's not going to escape death. Paul is now going to die as a result of his imprisonment. And he writes his final letter. These are the last things that Paul writes. And you can hear, as you read this letter that he writes, you can hear the words that he is writing in there as he's preparing the church for his own death. It's a part of the text as he writes it. Because his execution is going to come in just a few months after he finishes writing this letter. And in the last chapter of this last letter that Paul would write, we see him write these words. 2 Timothy 4:11. He says, "Only Luke is with me. Bring Mark. Bring Mark with you when you come, for he will be helpful to me in my ministry." In the end, it is Mark who Paul needs. Now, if that's not a hallmark moment, I don't know what is. I mean, this is a tearful reunion. These words alone from Paul must have brought supernatural healing to Mark's own soul and heart. Grace and forgiveness, mercy and love. And God wins, and the devil loses. Mark becomes the bishop of Alexandria. So friends, you might fail. You probably will fail. And it might be small and it might be colossal. I don't know what those things might be and what they have been, but you will fail in life. But I want you to know that you are destined by God. You can always start again. You're not bound by the choices you've made, but the next choice you're going to make. And you and I did our mistakes where we fall short. We need a close friend. We need a mentor. We need someone that will sharpen us, that will help us see things in our life that we can't see on our own. And for those that you have damaged in the world, you have to rebuild with them, just like Paul did with Mark, because God can do all things. He can use the bad for good. He can make the trouble become a positive. He can make our suffering an education for us to be able to help someone else who goes through it. Conflict is there. It will always be there. And for those that understand the words of Jesus and understand the teaching, and even the example of Mark and Barnabas and Paul, great things can come when we do conflict the right way.